Welcome to Christmas Stories for Sleep, where holiday magic meets peaceful dreams. Tonight, we're traveling to the charming coastal village of Seabreeze Island, off the coast of North Carolina, where the scent of pine mingles with salt air, and Christmas lights twinkle like stars reflected on gentle waves. Settle in comfortably, let your breathing slow, and allow yourself to be carried away to a place where palm trees wear strings of lights, where lighthouse beams sweep across festival decorations, and where sometimes the most beautiful destinations are the ones we never planned to find. This is the story of Grace Bennett, a busy event planner from New York, and Luke Carter, a widowed innkeeper with a young daughter named Maggie. It's a story about second chances, about community, about finding home in the most unexpected places, and about the magic that happens when we open our hearts to love. So close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let the gentle rhythm of ocean waves carry you into our story. The salt-tinged December wind whipped Grace Bennett's auburn hair across her face as she stood on the ferry deck, clutching her designer briefcase like a lifeline. Through the mist, she could make out the twinkling lights of Seabreeze Island growing larger, their warm glow a stark contrast to the steel-gray Atlantic stretching endlessly behind her. "This is not what I planned," she muttered, pulling her wool coat tighter against the coastal chill. The ferry's engine chugged steadily beneath her feet, a rhythmic reminder that she was getting further from her intended destination with each passing minute. Grace had been on her way to scope out the exclusive Sandpiper Resort on the mainland for her company's most important client, a winter gala that could make or break her career at pinnacle events. But a massive storm had grounded flights and rerouted the ferry, landing her on this tiny island off the North Carolina coast instead. Her perfectly planned schedule was now as scattered as the sea foam dancing across the ferry's wake. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Seabreeze Island. Due to the storm, this will be our final run today. Next ferry back to the mainland won't be until tomorrow morning, weather permitting." Grace's heart sank. She pulled out her phone, hoping for a signal to call her boss. But the screen showed only one lonely bar. "Perfect," she sighed. As the ferry docked at the quaint marina, Grace gathered her luggage and stepped onto the wooden pier. The island's Christmas decorations were unlike anything she'd ever seen. Palm trees wrapped in twinkling white lights swayed gently in the ocean breeze, while red and green lights outlined every building along the waterfront. The old lighthouse at the harbor's edge glowed with festive colors, its beams sweeping across boats decorated with garland and bows. Holiday markets lined the marina, their vendors packing up for the evening. The scent of pine mingled with salt air and something deliciously spiced, perhaps mulled cider or hot chocolate. Despite her predicament, Grace felt a tiny stirring of wonder at the magical scene. A weathered sign caught her eye: "Welcome to Seabreeze Island's Christmas by the Sea Festival, December 18 to 25. Today was December 18th, she realized. At least she'd stumbled into their main event. "Excuse me," she called to a woman closing up a booth selling seashell ornaments. "Could you recommend a place to stay for the night?" The woman's face lit up. "Oh, honey, you're in luck. The Mistletoe Inn is just up that hill. Luke Carter runs it, nicest man on the island. Tell him Donna sent you." Grace followed the woman's gesture toward a winding road that led up a gentle cliff. Even in the gathering dusk, she could see a large Victorian house silhouetted against the sky, its wraparound porch glowing with warm yellow light. 20 minutes later, Grace stood before the Mistletoe Inn, slightly out of breath from climbing the hill with her heavy suitcase. The inn was even more charming up close, a classic Cape Cod-style building with weathered shingles and white trim, surrounded by windswept pines decorated with simple white lights. Driftwood wreaths adorned with red velvet bows hung on every window, and sea glass ornaments caught the porch light like tiny stars. Through the large front windows, she glimpsed a cozy interior with a stone fireplace crackling merrily. The warm glow beckoned her forward, promising shelter from both the coastal wind and her growing anxiety about tomorrow's missed meetings. Grace climbed the steps to the wide porch, her heels clicking on the painted wooden boards. A brass ship's bell hung beside the front door, polished to a golden shine. She reached for the doorknob just as the door swung open. "Whoa!" came a deep male voice as Grace collided with a solid chest, her briefcase flying open and papers scattering across the porch like wayward snowflakes. Strong hands steadied her shoulders as she looked up into the warmest brown eyes she'd ever seen. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with slightly messy dark hair, and the kind of tan that spoke of days spent outdoors. He wore a cable-knit sweater over jeans, and his feet were bare despite the December chill. "I'm so sorry," Grace gasped, immediately dropping to gather her scattered documents. "I didn't see you. No harm done," he said, kneeling beside her to help collect the papers. His voice carried a gentle southern drawl that seemed to slow time itself. "These yours?" Grace watched in horror as he picked up several pages of her detailed resort analysis, complete with profit projections and expansion plans. The header clearly read, "Pinnacle Events Coastal Development Opportunities." "Yes, thank you," she said quickly, taking the papers from his hands before he could read more. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach. "You must be looking for a room," he said, rising to his full height and offering her a hand up. "I'm Luke Carter." "Welcome to the Mistletoe Inn, Grace Bennett," she replied, accepting his help and trying to ignore how warm and calloused his palm felt against hers. "Donna at the marina said you might have availability?" Luke's smile was like sunrise over the ocean, slow, warm, and completely transformative. "Lucky for you, we're not quite at capacity. Though I should warn you, things get pretty festive around here this time of year." As if summoned by his words, a young girl appeared in the doorway. She couldn't have been more than 8, with Luke's same warm eyes and honey-colored hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore flannel pajamas covered in dancing reindeer and fuzzy slippers shaped like penguins. "Dad, who's the pretty lady with the flying papers?" she asked with the directness that only children possessed. "Maggie, this is Miss Bennett. She needs a room for the night." Luke's voice grew softer when he addressed his daughter, and Grace caught a glimpse of the gentle father beneath the innkeeper's professional demeanor. "Are you here for the Christmas festival?" Maggie asked hopefully. "It's going to be the best one ever, isn't it, Dad?" Grace noticed a shadow pass over Luke's face, though his smile never wavered. "We'll see, sweetheart. Why don't you head back inside? It's cold out here." "But I want to show her the Christmas dolphin," Maggie protested. "The Christmas dolphin?" Grace found herself asking, charmed despite her stress. Maggie's face lit up. "Every year on Christmas Eve, a dolphin comes to the harbor and dances in the lights. Grandpa Carter used to say it was the same one every year, coming to bless the island for Christmas." "That sounds magical," Grace said, and meant it. When had she last believed in anything magical? "Maggie, bed," Luke said gently but firmly. "School tomorrow." The little girl sighed dramatically but kissed her father's cheek before disappearing back into the inn. "Nice to meet you, Miss Bennett. I hope you like it here." Luke shook his head with fond exasperation. "Sorry about that. She gets excited about Christmas. Let me show you inside." The inn's interior was even more welcoming than Grace had imagined. The main room featured that stone fireplace she'd glimpsed from outside, with stockings hung along the mantel, some clearly handmade by a child's loving hands. Comfortable chairs and sofas were arranged around the fire, and the walls displayed a fascinating collection of maritime artifacts mixed with Christmas decorations. A large Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with an eclectic mix of seashell ornaments, nautical rope garland, and twinkling lights that cast dancing shadows on the walls. "This is beautiful," Grace said, meaning every word. The inn felt like a home rather than a business, warm, lived in, and full of love. "Thanks. My grandparents built this place back in the 50s, Luke said, moving behind a reception desk crafted from what appeared to be an old ship's wheel. "I've been running it for about 5 years now." "What did you do before that?" Grace asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. She was here as a stranded traveler, not to make friends. "Commercial fishing, mainly. Worked the boat since I was 16. Luke's hands moved automatically as he spoke, reaching for a registration book with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd found his rhythm in this new life. But Maggie needed more stability after. "Well, after my wife passed, I'm sorry," Grace said softly. understanding now the shadow she'd seen cross his face earlier. "Thank you." Luke's smile was gentle but tinged with old sadness. "Sarah would have loved meeting you. She always said this island needed more visitors who appreciate its magic." As if sensing the weight of the conversation, Luke shifted into professional mode. "So, how many nights will you be staying? I should mention, we're booked solid starting Friday for the festival weekend, but I can accommodate you through Thursday if needed." "Just tonight," Grace said quickly. "I'm actually here on business. Well, not here specifically. I got rerouted." She gestured vaguely toward the window and the harbor beyond. "Ah, the storm." Luke nodded knowingly. "Ferry won't run again until the weather clears. Could be a day or two." Grace's carefully controlled composure cracked slightly. "A day or two? But I have meetings, deadlines." "Island time," Luke said with a sympathetic smile, "takes some getting used to. The mainland world doesn't stop spinning. But sometimes you have to stop with it." "I don't really have time to stop," Grace said, more to herself than to him. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced down to see 17 missed calls from her boss, Richard Pinnacle. Her stomach dropped. "Cell service is spotty here," Luke observed. "But there's a landline in your room, and the Wi-Fi is decent." "That's something, at least." Grace signed the registration book, her neat handwriting a stark contrast to the rustic setting. "What do I owe you?" "$85 a night, includes breakfast," Luke said. "Fair warning, Maggie helps in the kitchen, so breakfast conversations tend toward dolphins, Christmas wishes, and whatever book she's reading that week." Despite everything, Grace smiled. "Sounds refreshing, actually." Luke handed her an old-fashioned brass key attached to a small piece of driftwood. "Room 7, top of the stairs and to the left. Best view on the island, in my opinion. You can see the harbor, the lighthouse, and on clear mornings, dolphins playing in the surf." "Thank you," Grace said, surprised by how much she meant it. "And thank you for helping with my papers. I'm not usually so clumsy." "Happens to the best of us," Luke assured her. "City reflexes take time to adjust to island pace." As Grace climbed the narrow staircase, her heels muffled by a runner that looked hand-woven, she could hear Luke in the kitchen, talking quietly to Maggie about homework and toothbrushing. The domestic sounds filled her with an unexpected pang of longing. Room 7 was perfect, small but cozy, with a 4-poster bed covered in a quilt that looked homemade, a writing desk positioned by the window, and nautical touches that felt authentic rather than themed. Grace set down her suitcase and moved to the window, pulling back curtains that smelled faintly of sea salt and lavender. The view took her breath away. The harbor spread out below, boats bobbing gently at their moorings, their holiday lights reflecting in the dark water like fallen stars. The lighthouse beams swept across the scene every 30 seconds, illuminating the festival decorations and the occasional splash of a night fishing pelican. Grace pulled out her laptop and tried to connect to the Wi-Fi, but her heart wasn't in it. Instead, she found herself simply standing at the window, watching the peaceful scene below, and feeling something she hadn't experienced in years. The urge to simply be present in a moment instead of planning the next one. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Bennett?" came Maggie's voice. "Dad sent up some hot chocolate and cookies. He says, island hospitality." Grace opened the door to find the little girl holding a tray with a steaming mug decorated with seashells and a plate of cookies shaped like starfish and sand dollars. "These are beautiful," Grace said, accepting the tray. "Did you make them?" Maggie beamed. "Dad and I did. We make Christmas cookies every night during festival week. Tomorrow we're making sea turtle ones with green frosting." "That sounds wonderful," Grace said, charmed by the child's enthusiasm. "Are you really here on business?" Maggie asked with the directness Grace was learning to expect. "Because you look sad, and business shouldn't make people sad." Grace blinked, taken aback by the observation. Well, sometimes grown-up work is complicated. Dad says when work stops making you happy, it's time to find new work," Maggie said matter-of-factly. "That's why he stopped fishing and started running the inn. Now he's happy again, mostly." "Mostly?" Grace found herself asking. Maggie's expression grew thoughtful. "He misses Mom. and he worries about the festival. This year isn't going so good. Not enough visitors. Dad thinks maybe people don't want Christmas by the sea anymore. Grace felt a tug at her heart. What do you think? I think Dad needs to remember that Christmas magic is real, Maggie said solemnly. He used to believe before Mom got sick. Maybe if the festival is really, really special this year, he'll believe again. With that profound statement, Maggie skipped back down the hallway, leaving Grace standing in her doorway with a mug of hot chocolate and a heart suddenly much fuller than it had been an hour ago. As she settled into the window seat with her unexpected snack, Grace realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about quarterly reports or client deadlines. Instead, she was thinking about a little girl who believed in Christmas dolphins and a widowed father trying to keep magic alive for his daughter, while his own heart was still healing. Outside her window, the lighthouse beam continued its steady rotation, and Grace found herself wondering what it would be like to wake up to this view every morning, to be part of a community that decorated palm trees for Christmas and believed in dancing dolphins. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. Grace woke to the sound of seagulls and the gentle rush of waves against the shore. For a moment, she lay still in the unfamiliar bed, disoriented by the absence of city noise. No honking horns, no sirens, no construction, just the peaceful rhythm of the sea and the distant sound of wind chimes on the porch below. Sunlight streamed through the gauzy curtains, painting everything in the room with a warm, golden glow. Grace stretched and checked her phone. 7:30 a.m. In her normal life, she would have been at her desk for an hour already, but island time seemed to operate on different rules. The aroma of coffee and something deliciously sweet drifted up from the kitchen below, making her stomach rumble. Grace quickly showered and dressed in the most casual outfit she'd packed, dark jeans and a cream-colored cashmere sweater, before heading downstairs. The dining room was a sunny space overlooking the back garden, where winter-hardy flowers bloomed in neat beds bordered by driftwood planters. 3 other guests were already seated at tables, an elderly couple sharing a newspaper and a woman about Grace's age working on a laptop while eating. "Good morning, miss." "Bennett!" Maggie's cheerful voice called from the kitchen doorway. She wore a school uniform and an apron that was too big for her, its ties wrapped twice around her tiny waist. "Dad's making his famous lighthouse pancakes." "Lighthouse pancakes?" Grace asked, charmed by the girl's enthusiasm. "They're shaped like lighthouses, and he puts whipped cream on top for the light part," Maggie explained seriously. "They're the best on the whole island, maybe the whole world." Luke appeared from the kitchen, carrying a plate stacked with pancakes that did indeed resemble lighthouses, complete with whipped cream lights and a strawberry beacon on top. His hair was slightly mussed from cooking, and he wore a faded apron over his jeans and Henley shirt. "1 order of lighthouse specials," he said, setting the plate in front of Grace. "Maggie insisted I add extra whipped cream for our guest." "This is incredible," Grace said, genuinely amazed by the artistic breakfast. "It's almost too pretty to eat." "Dad's really good at making things pretty," Maggie said proudly. "He decorated the whole inn for Christmas, and he helps with the festival displays too." Luke's cheeks colored slightly at his daughter's praise. "Maggie, don't you have a bus to catch?" "Not for 10 more minutes," she said, settling into the chair across from Grace with her own smaller portion of pancakes. "Miss Bennett, are you going to explore the island today?" "I'm not sure," Grace admitted. "I need to make some work calls first." "But it's such a beautiful day," Maggie protested. "And the festival setup is happening at the harbor. There's going to be a big Christmas tree right on the pier, and tonight they're lighting all the boats for the blessing of the fleet." "The blessing of the fleet?" Grace asked, intrigued despite herself. "It's an old tradition," Luke explained, pouring Grace a cup of coffee from a carafe decorated with painted seashells. "The fishing boats get blessed for safe passage, and now it's part of the Christmas festival. The whole harbor lights up. It's quite a sight." "Dad used to be in the blessing when he was a fisherman," Maggie added. "His boat was called Sarah's Dream." Grace caught the slight tightening around Luke's eyes at the mention of his late wife's name. That's a beautiful name for a boat, she said gently. Sarah always wanted to travel, Luke said quietly. See the world beyond Seabreeze Island. I named the boat for all the places we plan to go together. Did you ever make those trips? Grace asked. Some of them. We went to Ireland for our honeymoon. Sarah's family was from County Cork. We planned to go back. His voice trailed off, and Grace saw Maggie reach over to squeeze her father's hand. Mom would want us to keep traveling, Maggie said with the wisdom of a child who'd had to grow up too fast. That's why I want to see New York City someday. She always said it was magical at Christmas. Grace's heart squeezed. It can be, she said. The tree at Rockefeller Center, the window displays, the lights, but it's different from this kind of magic. What do you mean? Maggie asked, genuinely curious. Grace paused, considering how to explain it. City Christmas is bigger, I guess, louder. But this, she gestured toward the window where the harbor sparkled in the morning sun. This feels more like what Christmas is supposed to be. Quieter, more real. Luke looked at her with surprise, as if he hadn't expected such a thoughtful answer from a city businesswoman. See, Dad? Maggie said triumphantly. I told you people still want Christmas by the sea. Miss Bennett gets it. The school bus honked outside, saving Luke from having to respond. Maggie jumped up, kissed her father's cheek, and grabbed her backpack. Bye, Miss Bennett. I hope you'll still be here when I get home, she called, rushing out the door. That's quite a daughter you have, Grace said after the whirlwind of Maggie's departure had settled. She's pretty special, Luke agreed, starting to clear the other guests' tables. Takes after her mother in all the best ways. Curious about the world, kind to everyone she meets, optimistic even when things get tough. How long has it been? Grace asked gently. Since your wife passed. Luke paused in his clearing, his hands still for a moment. 3 years next month. Car accident during a winter storm. She was coming back from the mainland after visiting her sister. I'm so sorry, Grace said, meaning it deeply. She couldn't imagine losing someone so central to your life, especially with a young child to raise alone. Some days are harder than others, Luke admitted. Holidays especially. Sarah loved Christmas. She's the one who started decorating the inn like this, who got involved with the festival committee. Maggie tries to keep up the traditions, but sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough. Grace watched him work, noting the efficient way he moved through the familiar routine of running the inn. From what I can see, you're doing an amazing job. Maggie is happy, confident, loved. That doesn't happen by accident. Luke looked up from stacking plates, his brown eyes meeting hers. Thank you. That means more than you know. They were interrupted by the other solo guest approaching the table. Excuse me, the woman said. I couldn't help but overhear. Are you Grace Bennett from Pinnacle Events? Grace's stomach dropped. Yes, I am. I'm Jessica Wong from Coastal Living magazine. I was supposed to interview you this week about your company's expansion into destination events, when you didn't show up at the Sandpiper Resort yesterday. There was a storm, Grace said quickly. Ferry delays. I'm hoping to get back to the mainland today. Actually, this is perfect, Jessica exclaimed. I'm here doing a piece on authentic coastal Christmas destinations. Could I interview you about Seabreeze Island instead? Get your professional take on what makes a place special for holiday events? Grace felt Luke's attention sharpen, though he continued cleaning tables. I'm not sure that's appropriate, she said carefully. I'm here as a tourist, not in any professional capacity. But you are an event professional, Jessica pressed. Your opinion would carry weight with our readers, and honestly, this place is incredible. The Christmas by the Sea Festival is exactly the kind of authentic experience our readers are looking for. The festival is struggling this year, Luke said quietly, setting down his cleaning cloth. We don't have the budget for the kind of promotions the mainland resorts do. Jessica's eyes lit up. Even better! A hidden gem, a community pulling together to save their traditions. It's a perfect story angle. Grace looked between Luke and Jessica, her mind racing. This could be exactly what the island needed. Positive publicity from a major magazine. But it would also mean extending her stay, missing more meetings, potentially damaging her own career. I'd need to think about it, Grace said finally. Of course, Jessica said, handing her a business card. "I'm staying through the weekend anyway. Let me know by this evening." After Jessica left for her room, Grace found herself alone with Luke in the dining room. He'd resumed cleaning, but she could sense his tension. "You don't have to say yes," he said without looking at her. "I know you have your own work to get back to." "Tell me about the festival," Grace said instead. "What's it normally like?" Luke's face brightened slightly. "It's beautiful, actually. The whole community comes together. Local artists sell their work, there's live music every night, boat tours to see the holiday lights, kids perform Christmas carols on the beach. The fishing fleet gets blessed on Christmas Eve, and then everyone gathers for midnight mass at the little chapel on Harbor Street." "It sounds magical," Grace said honestly. It was. But the last few years, fewer tourists have come. People want bigger events, more amenities. We can't compete with the resort properties on the mainland. Grace felt her professional instincts stirring. "What kind of marketing do you do? Social media presence, website?" Luke laughed, but it wasn't entirely happy. "I can barely keep up with running the inn and helping with festival setup. Sarah used to handle all that. She was good with computers, with promotion." Since she's been gone, an idea began forming in Grace's mind. Dangerous, impractical, but compelling. What if someone helped? With the marketing, I mean. The festival. "Miss Bennett," Grace, "you don't owe us anything. You're a guest who got stranded by weather." "Maybe," Grace said slowly. "Or maybe I'm exactly what this place needs. And maybe this place is exactly what I need, too." The admission surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise Luke. He stopped cleaning and really looked at her, his brown eyes searching her face. "What do you mean?" Grace took a breath, hardly believing what she was about to say. "I mean, maybe I should call my boss and tell him I'm extending my stay. Maybe Jessica's right, and this story could help the festival. And maybe..." "Maybe what?" Luke asked gently. "Maybe I need to remember why I got into event planning in the first place," Grace said. "It wasn't for corporate galas and profit margins. It was because I wanted to create moments that mattered. Bring people together, make magic happen." Luke was quiet for a long moment, and Grace held her breath, wondering if she'd said too much, revealed too much. "The festival committee meets tonight," he said finally. "If you're serious about helping, you could come, meet the others, see what we're working with." "I'd like that," Grace said, and meant it completely. "Fair warning, it's a small group, mostly volunteers who've been doing this for years their own way. They might not be too eager to accept advice from an outsider." "I understand," Grace said, "but sometimes an outsider's perspective is exactly what's needed." Luke smiled then, the first completely unguarded smile she'd seen from him. Sarah used to say the same thing. That's how she convinced the committee to add the children's carol performance. She was from the mainland originally, saw things with fresh eyes. Sounds like she was a wise woman. "She was," Luke agreed. I think she would have liked you." The simple statement hit Grace with unexpected force. She'd spent so many years focused on professional achievements, on impressing clients and colleagues, that she'd forgotten how good it felt to be liked simply for who she was. "I'd like to have met her too," Grace said softly. They were interrupted by the arrival of a delivery truck, and Luke excused himself to handle a shipment of supplies. Grace watched him through the window as he chatted easily with the driver, both men laughing at something, before unloading boxes of what appeared to be Christmas decorations. This was Luke's world, small, interconnected, where everyone knew everyone and people helped their neighbors without expecting anything in return. It was so different from her life in New York, where she scheduled lunch dates with friends weeks in advance and sent Christmas cards to clients she barely knew. Grace pulled out her phone and stared at the missed call notifications from her boss. She needed to call him back, needed to explain where she was and why she'd missed yesterday's meetings. But for the first time in her career, she found herself wanting to prioritize something else over work. Instead of calling Richard, she opened her laptop and began researching coastal Christmas festivals, marketing strategies for small communities, and social media campaigns for authentic travel experiences. If she was going to help Seabreeze Island save their festival, she wanted to do it right. As she worked, she found herself glancing out the window every few minutes, watching Luke arrange Christmas lights on the inn's front porch. He worked with the same quiet competence she'd noticed the night before. But there was something more now, a lightness in his movements that hadn't been there when she'd first arrived. Maybe it was the beautiful day, or maybe it was the prospect of help with the festival. Or maybe, Grace thought with a flutter of something that felt dangerously like hope. Maybe it was her. Grace stood at the edge of Seabreeze Island's main harbor, watching the organized chaos of festival preparation unfold before her. The salty December air carried the scent of pine boughs and hot apple cider, while local volunteers strung lights between the marina's lampposts and arranged vendor booths along the weathered wooden pier. It's something, isn't it? Luke's voice came from beside her, and Grace turned to see him approaching with 2 steaming cups of coffee. He'd traded his innkeeper's attire for work clothes, faded jeans, a navy pullover, and boots that had seen their share of honest labor. "It's beautiful," Grace said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I can see why this festival means so much to the community." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a group of children help their parents hang garland shaped like anchors and starfish along the pier railing. The scene was picture perfect in its simplicity, the kind of authentic community spirit that couldn't be manufactured by any corporate event planning company. A familiar voice called, and they turned to see Maggie running toward them, her school backpack bouncing against her small frame. "Did you see?" Mrs. Patterson brought her famous Christmas cookies, and Mr. O'Brien is setting up the hot chocolate stand. "How was school, sweetheart?" Luke asked, automatically checking that his daughter's coat was zipped against the coastal breeze. "Good. I told my teacher about Miss Bennett, and she said maybe Miss Bennett could come speak to our class about city Christmas traditions." Grace felt a flutter of panic. "Oh, I don't know if I'll be here long enough. You're staying for the festival committee meeting tonight, right?" Maggie interrupted with a persistence only children could manage. "Dad said you might help us make this year super special." Luke's cheeks colored slightly. "Maggie, don't put pressure on Miss Bennett. She has her own work to think about." But Grace found herself crouching down to Maggie's eye level, charmed by the girl's enthusiasm. "Actually, I'd love to hear more about what you're planning for the festival. What's your favorite part?" Maggie's face lit up like the lighthouse beacon. "The boat blessing on Christmas Eve. All the fishing boats and pleasure craft get decorated with lights, and Pastor Murphy says a prayer for safe journeys. Then everyone releases floating lanterns into the harbor, while the choir sings carols from the pier." "That sounds magical," Grace said, and meant it. "It is. And this year, I'm going to sing a solo during the children's concert. Mom used to sing in the choir before." Maggie's enthusiasm dimmed slightly, but she rallied quickly. "Dad says she would want the music to continue." Grace glanced up at Luke, who was watching his daughter with a mixture of love and concern. "What song are you going to sing?" she asked gently. "Silent Night," Maggie said proudly. "Dad's been helping me practice, but he says I need to work on my stage presence, whatever that means." Grace smiled. "Stage presence is about feeling confident and connecting with your audience. It's something I could help you with, if you'd like." "Really?" Maggie bounced on her toes. "You know about performing?" "I do a lot of public speaking for my job," Grace explained. "Presentations, client meetings. The principles are similar." "That would be wonderful," Luke said, his gratitude evident. "I'm afraid my expertise runs more toward pancakes and inn management than performance coaching." "Dad, can Miss Bennett come help set up the big Christmas tree?" Maggie asked. "It's going to go right there." She pointed to the end of the pier. "And we need lots of people to help with the decorations." Grace looked where Maggie pointed and saw several community members gathered around an enormous Norfolk pine that must have been 12 feet tall. The tree lay on its side while volunteers worked to secure it in a massive stand. "I should probably get back to the inn," Grace said, suddenly aware that she was wearing her good boots and cashmere sweater. "Hardly appropriate for manual labor." "Nonsense," came a commanding voice from behind them. They turned to see a woman in her 70s approaching, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the ocean breeze. She wore practical clothes but moved with the bearing of someone accustomed to being in charge. "Any friend of Luke's is welcome to join our tree decorating. I'm Eleanor Hartwell, Festival Committee Chairwoman, Grace Bennett." Grace said, accepting Eleanor's firm handshake. I'm staying at Luke's Inn. The event planner from New York, Eleanor said, and Grace was startled that word had already spread. Jessica Wong from the magazine mentioned you might be interested in helping with our little festival. I'm considering it, Grace said carefully. Eleanor's eyes sparkled with something that might have been mischief. Well, nothing like jumping in with both feet. Come along. We need all hands to get this tree vertical and properly decorated before the evening tide comes in. Before Grace could protest, she found herself swept along with the group of volunteers, Luke and Maggie flanking her on either side. Someone pressed a pair of work gloves into her hands, and suddenly she was part of the human chain helping to guide the massive tree into its upright position. Easy now, called Tom O'Brien, a weathered man who appeared to be directing the operation. Steady as she goes. The tree swayed slightly as they worked to secure it, and Grace found herself laughing as she struggled to keep her footing on the pier's wooden planks. When had she last done anything like this? When had she last been part of a group, working toward a common goal that wasn't tied to profit margins or quarterly reports? Beautiful, Maggie exclaimed as the tree finally stood straight and tall, its top nearly reaching the level of the lighthouse beam. Now for the fun part. The fun part turned out to be decorating the tree with an eclectic collection of ornaments that spoke to the island's maritime heritage. There were glass floats in jewel tones, starfish painted in metallic gold and silver, miniature ships in bottles, and strings of lights designed to look like fishing nets. Each family contributes ornaments, Luke explained, as he handed Grace a delicate seahorse made from twisted wire and sea glass. Some have been part of the festival for 20 years or more. Grace carefully hung the seahorse on a branch within her reach, marveling at the craftsmanship. These are incredible. Who makes them? Local artists mostly, said a woman Grace hadn't met yet. I'm Beth Murphy. My husband's the pastor here. I run a small ceramic studio, and we have several other artisans on the island. The festival is our biggest selling opportunity of the year. Beth's pieces are in galleries on the mainland, Eleanor added proudly. But she chooses to stay here, keep the artistic community alive. Grace looked around at the other volunteers, a mix of year-round residents and what appeared to be seasonal visitors, all working together with the easy cooperation of people who genuinely cared about their community. It was unlike anything she'd experienced in her professional life, where collaboration often felt forced and agenda-driven. Miss Bennett, Maggie appeared at her elbow with a small ornament in her hands. Would you like to hang Mom's angel? Grace looked down at the ornament, a delicate angel made from driftwood and shells, with gossamer wings that caught the afternoon light. It was clearly handmade, created with love and care. Are you sure? Grace asked, touched by the gesture. It seems like something you or your dad should do. Mom would want someone new to hang it, Maggie said with the matter-of-fact wisdom Grace was learning to expect from her. She always said Christmas was about welcoming strangers and making them family. Grace's throat tightened unexpectedly. She glanced at Luke, who was watching the exchange with soft eyes. It would be an honor, Grace said quietly, taking the angel from Maggie's small hands. She found a perfect spot near the top of the tree, where the angel would catch both the festival lights and the lighthouse beam. As she hung it carefully, she felt the attention of the other volunteers and realized this was more than just decorating a tree. It was a moment of acceptance, of welcome. Perfect, Luke said softly, and when Grace looked at him, she saw something new in his expression. Warmth that went beyond mere hospitality. The sun was beginning to set over the harbor, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reflected off the water. The tree lights were turned on for the first time, and Grace joined the spontaneous cheer that went up from the gathered crowd. It's beautiful, she murmured, and realized she wasn't just talking about the tree, or the sunset, or even the picturesque harbor. She was talking about this. The sense of belonging, of being part of something meaningful. Ice cream, announced a teenage boy who'd been helping with the electrical connections. Mrs. Peterson's opening the parlor for hot fudge sundaes to celebrate. The crowd began to move en masse toward a small shop at the landward end of the pier, its old-fashioned sign advertising Peterson's ice cream, serving Seabreeze Island since 1962. Coming? Luke asked Grace, offering his arm as they navigated the pier's uneven planks in the gathering dusk. I should probably get back, Grace said, though she made no move to leave. I need to call my boss. Check in with work. Work will still be there tomorrow, Luke said gently. But Mrs. Peterson's hot fudge is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Grace found herself accepting his arm, enjoying the warmth and steadiness of his presence beside her. Just one Sunday, she said, as if convincing herself. Peterson's ice cream turned out to be a throwback to another era. Red vinyl booths, a black and white checkered floor, and a display case full of homemade ice cream in flavors Grace had never heard of. The walls were covered with photographs of the island throughout the decades, including several shots of past Christmas festivals. 2 hot fudge sundaes and 1 kitty cone with sprinkles, Luke told the elderly woman behind the counter. Coming right up, Luke, Mrs. Peterson replied with a warm smile. And you must be the young lady Jessica mentioned. Welcome to Seabreeze Island, dear. Grace was beginning to understand that news traveled fast in a small community. Thank you. The ice cream smells wonderful. Family recipe, Mrs. Peterson said proudly. Been making it the same way for 60 years. They found a booth near the window overlooking the harbor, where they could see their newly decorated tree twinkling in the darkness. Maggie chattered happily about school and her upcoming solo performance, while Grace and Luke listened, sharing smiles over her enthusiasm. Tell Miss Bennet about the Christmas dolphin, Luke suggested when Maggie paused to attack her ice cream cone. Oh! Maggie's eyes lit up. Every Christmas Eve, after the boat blessing, a dolphin comes to the harbor. It swims around the boats and jumps out of the water like it's dancing to the carols. Grandpa Carter saw it first, back when Dad was little, and it's come every year since. Every year? Grace asked, charmed by the story. Well, almost every year. Maggie amended it didn't come the year Mom died, but Dad says that's because it was grieving too. Grace's heart squeezed at the simple acceptance in Maggie's voice. Children had such a natural understanding of the connection between all living things. Some people say it's just coincidence, Luke said, but Sarah always believed it was something special. She used to bring hot chocolate down to the pier on Christmas Eve, just in case anyone wanted to wait for the dolphin. Are you continuing the tradition? Grace asked. Maggie wants to, Luke said, glancing at his daughter. I've been hesitant. Grace understood. The tradition was so tied to his late wife that participating felt like both honoring her memory and highlighting her absence. I think Mom would want us to share the hot chocolate, Maggie said firmly. She never liked it when people were cold or sad. Maybe this year, Luke said softly, and Grace caught the significance of the statement. Maybe this year he was ready to reclaim some of the joy that grief had taken from him. Their conversation was interrupted by Eleanor Hartwell approaching their table. Grace, I hope you'll consider joining us for tonight's committee meeting, 7 o'clock at the community center. I'm planning on it, Grace said, surprised by her own certainty. Excellent. Luke, will you be bringing the inn's booth proposal? Already prepared, Luke confirmed. We're thinking hot cider and Sarah's Christmas cookie recipe. Perfect. And Grace? Eleanor turned back to her with a smile that was both welcoming and calculating. I understand you have experience with large-scale event marketing? Grace nodded cautiously. Among other things. Wonderful. We could use some fresh perspective on how to reach a broader audience without losing our authentic island charm. After Eleanor left, Grace found herself looking around the ice cream parlor with new eyes. The vintage photographs, the family recipes, the sense of continuity and tradition. These were exactly the elements that modern travelers craved but rarely found in manufactured resort experiences. Penny for your thoughts, Luke said, interrupting her reverie. I was just thinking, Grace said slowly, that you all have something really special here. Something that can't be replicated or manufactured. But, Luke prompted, hearing the unspoken continuation in her voice, but you're not telling the story well. The marketing, the outreach, it's not reaching the people who would most appreciate what Seabreeze Island has to offer. And you think you could help with that? Luke asked, his tone careful. Grace met his eyes, seeing both hope and wariness there. I think I'd like to try. Maggie clapped her hands excitedly. Does that mean you're staying for the whole festival? Grace's breath caught. Was she really considering extending her stay, missing more work, disappointing her boss, potentially damaging her career for a community she'd known for less than 2 days? I'm staying, she heard herself say, and felt a flutter of terror mixed with exhilaration at the words. Luke's face broke into a smile that was like sunrise over the ocean, warm, bright, and full of possibility. In that case, he said, "Welcome to the Christmas by the Sea Committee." As they walked back to the inn under a canopy of stars, with Maggie skipping ahead and the festival lights twinkling behind them, Grace felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in years, she was exactly where she wanted to be, doing something that mattered for reasons that had nothing to do with profit or professional advancement. It felt like coming alive again. It felt like Christmas magic. The Seabreeze Island Community Center buzzed with the energy of a group accustomed to getting things done with limited resources and unlimited heart. Grace sat between Luke and Eleanor at a long table covered with coffee-stained papers, hand-drawn charts, and what appeared to be 15 years' worth of festival documentation. "Budget for advertising," announced Harold Jenkins, a retired accountant who served as the festival's treasurer, "is exactly $437. Grace nearly choked on her coffee. $400? Hey, that's up from last year, said Tom O'Brien with a grin. We saved money by getting my nephew to design new flyers instead of paying the print shop. Grace looked around the table at the 8 committee members. All volunteers, all clearly passionate about their community. All working within constraints that would have given her corporate clients anxiety attacks. Okay, she said, pulling out her laptop. Let's start with what we have. Free resources, existing assets, opportunities we might not be utilizing. Such as? Eleanor asked, leaning forward with interest. Grace opened a new document and projected it onto the wall using a borrowed screen. Such as this. She'd spent the afternoon creating a basic presentation about the island's untapped potential. The first slide showed a compilation of photos she'd taken during the tree decorating, candid shots of families working together, the harbor at sunset, children laughing as they hung ornaments. The images captured the authentic joy and community spirit that no resort could manufacture. These were taken today? Luke asked, leaning closer to study the screen. With my phone, Grace confirmed. Now imagine these images shared on social media with the right hashtags, the right story. People are desperately seeking authentic experiences, especially during the holidays. She clicked to the next slide, which showed statistics about holiday travel trends and the growing market for experiential tourism. 67% of travelers say they prefer destinations with authentic local culture over manufactured attractions, Grace continued. And Christmas markets and festivals rank in the top 5 most desired holiday experiences. Harold pushed his glasses up his nose. That's all well and good, but how do we reach these people without a marketing budget? Grace smiled. That's where strategy comes in. Social media is free. Word-of-mouth marketing is free. Press coverage is free. We just need to be smart about how we tell your story. She clicked again, revealing a mock-up of an Instagram account for the festival. Seabreeze Island Christmas by the Sea. We post behind-the-scenes content leading up to the festival. Local artists creating ornaments, families preparing traditional recipes, boats being decorated for the blessing. We make people feel like they're already part of the community before they even arrive. I like it, said Beth Murphy, the ceramics artist. It's not about selling them something artificial. It's about inviting them into our traditions. Exactly, Grace said, warming to her theme. And Jessica Wong's article in Coastal Living will be the perfect catalyst. National press coverage gives us credibility, and we can leverage that into local media attention too. Eleanor made notes in her precise handwriting. What would we need to make this work? Volunteers to help with social media content creation, Grace said. Someone to coordinate with local businesses for cross-promotion. A simple website with event information and lodging recommendations. Most importantly, everyone needs to be willing to welcome visitors as part of the community, not just as tourists. Luke had been quiet during her presentation, but now he spoke up. What about capacity? The inn only has 12 rooms. And most other lodging is already booked for the festival weekend. Grace nodded. That's actually part of what makes this special. The intimate scale. We're not trying to compete with major resort destinations. We're offering something they can't. A genuine small-town Christmas experience where visitors become temporary neighbors. Bed and breakfasts on the mainland, suggested Mary Patterson, who ran the island's small grocery store. Ferry partnerships for day visitors. Campground spaces for families who don't mind roughing it a little. Perfect, Grace said, adding notes to her growing list. We position the limited capacity as exclusive rather than restrictive. Discover Seabreeze Island's intimate Christmas by the sea, where every visitor becomes family. Tom O'Brien raised his hand. What about the weather, if we get another storm like last year? We plan for multiple scenarios, Grace said. Indoor backup venues, weather-dependent versus weather-independent activities, and we market the dramatic coastal weather as part of the experience. Experience a true coastal Christmas, where nature sets the stage. The group spent the next hour working through practical details, volunteer schedules, vendor coordination, logistics for the increased visitors Grace's marketing might bring. Grace found herself energized by the collaborative problem-solving, so different from her usual corporate meetings where decisions were made by committee and implemented by subordinates. I have one concern, Eleanor said as the meeting began to wind down. We don't want to lose what makes our festival special. It's not just an event for us. It's how we celebrate Christmas as a community. That's exactly why it will work, Grace assured her. People don't want to attend a festival that was created for tourists. They want to be invited into a real celebration. The authenticity is what makes it valuable. As the committee members gathered their papers and headed into the night, Luke lingered behind to help Grace pack up the projection equipment. Thank you, he said quietly. I haven't seen Eleanor this excited about the festival since Sarah was alive. Grace looked up from coiling cables. Eleanor strikes me as someone who's always excited about community projects. She is, but it's been harder the last few years. Fewer visitors, smaller budgets, people moving away for better opportunities. Some folks were starting to talk about scaling back the festival, maybe ending it altogether. The thought of this magical community tradition disappearing made Grace's chest tighten. That can't happen. I agree, but it was starting to feel inevitable until Luke paused, studying her face in the fluorescent light of the community center. Until you showed up. I didn't do anything special, Grace protested. I just applied some basic marketing principles. You did more than that. Luke stepped closer, and Grace caught the scent of sea air and pine that seemed to cling to his clothes. You saw what we couldn't see anymore, that this place is special, that our traditions matter. Sometimes you need fresh eyes to remember what you have. They were standing close enough that Grace could see the gold flecks in Luke's brown eyes, could notice the way his hair curled slightly at the collar. She became aware of the empty building around them, the intimacy of the moment. I should get back to the inn, she said, but made no move to leave. Grace, Luke said, his voice lower than before, I know you have a life in New York, a career that's important to you. I don't want you to feel pressured to stay longer than you want to. What if I want to stay? The question escaped before Grace could consider its implications. Luke's eyes searched her face. Do you? Grace thought about her apartment in Manhattan, her corner office with its view of concrete and glass, her carefully planned life that suddenly felt more like a routine than a choice. I think I do, she said softly. I think I need to see this through. The festival, the marketing campaign, all of it. And after the festival? Luke asked. Grace didn't have an answer for that, so instead she reached up and touched his cheek, feeling the slight roughness of stubble beneath her palm. He leaned into the touch, his eyes closing briefly. After the festival, she said, We'll see. Luke covered her hand with his own, pressing it more firmly against his face. Grace. The sound of the front door opening interrupted them, and they stepped apart quickly as Eleanor's voice called out, Luke, did you forget this? She appeared in the meeting room doorway holding his festival planning binder. Thanks, Eleanor, Luke said, accepting the binder with slightly flushed cheeks. Grace was just helping me pack up. Eleanor's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled by their casual demeanor, but she simply wished them both good night and headed back to her car. The walk back to the inn was quiet, filled with the comfortable tension of two people navigating new feelings. The festival lights, strung along Harbor Street, cast everything in a warm glow, and the sound of waves against the shore provided a peaceful soundtrack. "Maggie will be excited that you're staying longer," Luke said as they climbed the hill toward the inn. "Just Maggie?" Grace asked, then immediately regretted the boldness of the question. Luke stopped walking and turned to face her. "No, not just Maggie." The simple statement hung between them in the salt-tinged air. Grace felt her heart beating faster as Luke stepped closer, his eyes holding hers in the glow of the inn's porch lights. "Grace," he said again, and this time her name sounded like a prayer. When he kissed her, it was gentle and careful, as if he were afraid she might disappear like morning mist over the harbor. Grace melted into the warmth of it, her hands finding the soft wool of his sweater, anchoring herself to this moment, this man, this unexpected turn her life had taken. When they broke apart, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "I haven't felt this way since." He paused, struggling with the words. "Since Sarah," Grace finished gently. "Yes, and I'm not sure I know how to do this. How to care about someone new while still honoring her memory." Grace's heart ached for the complexity of his emotions. "Maybe you don't have to figure it all out at once. Maybe you just have to trust that it's okay to feel happy again." Luke's smile was soft and grateful. "When did you become so wise about matters of the heart?" "About 5 minutes ago," Grace admitted, making him laugh. They stood together on the inn's porch, wrapped in the gentle sounds of the island at night, waves and wind chimes and the distant call of a night bird. Grace couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so present in a moment, so aware of her own heartbeat and breathing. "I should let you get some rest," Luke said finally, though he made no move to step away. "Should," Grace agreed, also staying exactly where she was. It was the sound of a car door slamming that finally broke the spell. They stepped apart as headlights swept across the inn's facade, and Tom O'Brien's voice called out, "Luke, sorry to bother you, but we've got a problem with the harbor electrical setup. I'll be right there," Luke called back, then turned to Grace with an apologetic smile. "Island life. Everyone helps with everything." "Go," Grace said, standing on her tiptoes to give him a quick kiss. "I'll see you in the morning." As Luke headed down the hill to deal with the electrical crisis, Grace let herself into the inn and climbed the stairs to her room. But instead of immediately getting ready for bed, she found herself at the window, looking out over the harbor where Luke and Tom were already working by flashlight to solve whatever problem had arisen. This was what community looked like, she realized. People helping each other without question, sharing responsibilities and supporting each other through difficulties. It was so different from her city life, where she barely knew her neighbors' names. Grace pulled out her phone and, without overthinking it, began composing a text to her boss. "Richard, I need to extend my trip for the rest of the week. Important potential client opportunity. We'll explain more tomorrow." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then opened her laptop and began working on the social media strategy she'd outlined at the meeting. If she was going to help save the Christmas by the Sea Festival, she was going to do it right. But as she worked, her mind kept drifting to the feel of Luke's lips against hers, the gentle strength of his hands, the way he'd looked at her as if she were something precious and unexpected. She was falling for him, falling hard and fast in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. Outside her window, the lighthouse beams swept steadily across the harbor, and Grace found herself thinking about Maggie's story of the Christmas dolphin. Maybe magic was real, and maybe it came in forms you didn't expect, like storms that rerouted your ferry to exactly where you needed to be. Grace woke before dawn to the sound of rain pattering against her window, but instead of the dreary gray she expected, the early morning sky was painted in shades of rose and gold. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and fresh, with droplets of water catching the first light like tiny prisms on every surface. She dressed quickly in jeans and a soft blue sweater, then made her way downstairs to find the inn already alive with activity. The scent of cinnamon and vanilla filled the air, and she could hear Maggie's voice from the kitchen, chattering excitedly about something. "Morning, Grace," Luke called from behind the registration desk, where he was coordinating with what appeared to be several new arrivals. Coffee's fresh, and Maggie's made her famous Christmas morning pancakes. Christmas morning pancakes? Grace asked, accepting a mug from Luke's outstretched hand. Their fingers brushed briefly, sending a familiar flutter through her stomach. "It's not actually Christmas morning," Maggie announced, appearing from the kitchen wearing an apron covered in flower fingerprints. "But they're shaped like Christmas trees and have green food coloring, so they count." Grace followed Maggie into the kitchen, where a impressive breakfast spread was laid out on the large farmhouse table. In addition to the green Christmas tree pancakes, there were fresh biscuits, local honey, bacon that smelled like heaven, and what appeared to be a fruit salad arranged in the shape of a wreath. "This is incredible," Grace said, genuinely amazed. "Do you always cook like this?" "Special occasion," Luke said, joining them in the kitchen. 3 more families arrived this morning for the festival weekend, including one from the magazine article Jessica published online yesterday. "It's already online?" Grace asked, pulling out her phone to check. "Posted at 6 a.m., Luke confirmed. "Jessica sent me the link. Look at this." Grace read over his shoulder as he pulled up the Coastal Living website on his tablet. The article was beautifully written, with stunning photos of the harbor, the inn, and yesterday's tree decorating. But what made Grace's breath catch was the headline, "Seabreeze Island's Christmas by the Sea, where holiday magic meets authentic community." "She quoted you," Luke said, scrolling down to a section that made Grace's cheeks warm. According to event planning professional Grace Bennett, who discovered the festival by chance, Seabreeze Island offers something increasingly rare: authentic community celebration, where visitors become temporary family members rather than mere tourists. The island's Christmas by the Sea Festival represents the kind of genuine holiday experience that no resort can manufacture. "I sound pretentious," Grace groaned. "You sound like someone who understands what makes this place special," Luke corrected gently. Maggie tugged on Grace's sweater. "Dad, can we show Grace the secret beach today? Since it's such a pretty morning?" Luke looked questioningly at Grace. "We usually take a walk after breakfast on festival weekend. There's a cove on the north side of the island that's perfect for—" He paused, seeming to reconsider. "Well, it's pretty, if you're interested." Something in his tone suggested this was more than just a casual suggestion, and Grace found herself nodding before fully considering what she was agreeing to. After breakfast, the Christmas tree pancakes were indeed delicious. Grace found herself walking along a narrow path that wound through the island's interior. Luke carried a small backpack, while Maggie skipped ahead, pointing out various landmarks and sharing island folklore with the enthusiasm of a born tour guide. "That's Widow's Point," Maggie said, gesturing toward a rocky outcropping. "Pirates used to hide treasure there back in the old days." "Pirates?" Grace asked, charmed by the girl's storytelling. "Well, that's what Grandpa Carter used to say," Luke clarified with a smile. "The island has quite a bit of pirate history, actually. This area was a popular hiding spot in the 1700s. The path emerged from a grove of wind-sculpted oaks onto a stretch of pristine beach that took Grace's breath away. The sand was pale gold, dotted with shells and interesting pieces of driftwood. Gentle waves lapped at the shore, and the entire cove was sheltered by rocky cliffs covered in wild beach grass. "It's incredible," Grace said, kicking off her shoes to feel the sand between her toes. "How is this place not overrun with tourists?" "It's not marked on any maps," Luke said, settling onto a piece of driftwood that had been smoothed by years of salt and sun. "Private property. Belonged to my grandparents, now belongs to me. Family has always kept it as a special place." Maggie was already running along the water's edge, collecting shells and calling out whenever she found something particularly interesting. Grace watched her with a smile, then settled beside Luke on the driftwood log. "Thank you for sharing this with me," she said softly. "I can see why it's special to your family." Luke was quiet for a moment, watching his daughter play. "Sarah and I used to come here when we needed to talk about important things. When we decided to get married, when we found out about Maggie. When?" His voice trailed off. "When she got sick?" Grace asked gently. Luke nodded. "The doctors in Raleigh had given us the diagnosis. 6 months, maybe a year if the treatment worked." We came here to figure out how to tell Maggie, how to make the most of whatever time we had left. Grace's heart ached for the pain in his voice. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been. The hardest part was Sarah worrying about me and Maggie after she was gone. She made me promise to keep living, to find happiness again. Luke picked up a shell and turned it over in his hands. I thought I knew what that meant at the time. I thought it was about keeping the inn running, making sure Maggie had a stable home, maintaining the family traditions. But, Grace prompted. Luke looked at her then, his brown eyes serious. I didn't realize she meant this kind of happiness, the kind that comes from caring about someone new. Grace felt her breath catch. Luke? I know it's too soon to be saying things like this, he continued quickly. You've been here 3 days, and I barely know you beyond the fact that you make incredible marketing presentations and you're kind to my daughter. What else do you want to know? Grace asked. The question seemed to surprise him. Everything, he said simply. I want to know about your life in New York. What made you choose event planning? Whether you always drink your coffee black, or if you're just being polite. I want to know what makes you laugh, what you're afraid of, whether you ever imagined yourself sitting on a beach in North Carolina, talking to a widowed innkeeper about his late wife. Grace smiled at the last part. Definitely never imagined that scenario. Tell me something, Luke said. Something real about yourself that I wouldn't learn from a magazine interview or a business card. Grace considered the question, turning it over in her mind like Luke had been turning over the shell. I used to want to be a travel writer, she said finally. When I was young, maybe 10 or 11, I would read travel magazines and dream about visiting all these incredible places, writing about the people I met and the stories they shared. What happened to that dream? Reality, I guess. College counselors who steered me toward practical careers, entry-level jobs that led to other jobs that led to a career path I never consciously chose. Grace picked up her own shell, feeling its smooth surface. I've been successful by any objective measure. Good salary, nice apartment, respected position. But I can't remember the last time I felt passionate about my work. And now? Luke asked. Grace looked around the beautiful hidden cove, then at Maggie, who was building an elaborate sand castle, then at Luke himself. Now I'm sitting on a beach helping to save a Christmas festival in a place I'd never heard of 5 days ago. And I feel more excited about work than I have in years. Luke's smile was warm and understanding. Sometimes the best destinations are the ones you never plan to visit. Is that from your innkeeper's manual? Grace teased. That's from experience, Luke said seriously. I never planned to run an inn either. I was going to fish until I retired, maybe captain my own boat someday. But life had other plans. Do you miss it? Fishing? Sometimes. I miss being out on the water early in the morning, the camaraderie of the crew, the satisfaction of a good catch. Luke paused, considering. But I love what I do now, too. Taking care of people, being part of their vacation memories, raising Maggie in a place where she's surrounded by community. It's a different kind of satisfaction. Dad, Maggie called from the water's edge. Come see what I found. Luke stood and offered Grace his hand. Shall we see what treasure young Captain Maggie has discovered? Grace accepted his help up, but instead of releasing her hand immediately, Luke held onto it as they walked toward his daughter. His palm was warm and slightly rough from outdoor work, and Grace found herself noting how perfectly their fingers seemed to fit together. Maggie's discovery turned out to be a piece of sea glass in an unusual deep blue color, worn smooth by decades of ocean tumbling. It's beautiful, Grace said, examining the translucent gem. What will you do with it? Add it to my collection, Maggie said proudly. I have jars and jars of sea glass. Maybe someday I'll make jewelry like Mrs. Murphy does with her ceramics. Speaking of jewelry, Luke said, reaching into his backpack, I brought something I thought you might like to see. He pulled out a small wooden box, weathered by age but clearly well-maintained. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a pendant made from what appeared to be several pieces of sea glass held together by delicate silver wire. Sarah made this, Luke said quietly. She was always collecting sea glass from this beach, said each piece had its own story. This was her favorite. She wore it almost every day. Grace studied the pendant, moved by the obvious love and care that had gone into its creation. It's gorgeous. She was talented. She would have liked you, Maggie said matter-of-factly, echoing her father's words from the night before. She always said the ocean brings people exactly what they need, when they need it. Luke's eyes met Grace's over his daughter's head, and the intensity of his gaze made her heart skip. "The ocean has good timing," he said softly. They spent another hour on the beach, with Maggie teaching Grace how to skip stones and Luke sharing more stories about the island's history. As they walked back toward the inn, Grace found herself thinking about the sea glass pendant, about Sarah's belief that the ocean brought people what they needed. Maybe she'd been brought to Seabreeze Island for a reason that had nothing to do with business meetings or ferry delays. Maybe she'd been brought here for this, for Luke, for Maggie, for the sense of belonging she felt in this small community. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. "Grace," Luke said as they approached the inn, where several cars were now parked in the small lot. "Tonight there's a bonfire on the main beach, with caroling and hot chocolate. It's one of our favorite festival traditions. I'd love to come," Grace said. "Good, because Maggie's been practicing her solo, and she could use a friendly face in the audience." Maggie beamed up at Grace. "Will you sit in the front row? Dad gets nervous when I perform, but maybe if you're there too." "I wouldn't miss it," Grace promised. As they entered the inn, Grace caught a glimpse of herself in the hallway mirror and was startled by what she saw. Her hair was tousled by the ocean breeze, her cheeks were pink from the sun and salt air, and she was smiling in a way that looked completely natural and unguarded. She looked like someone who belonged here. She looked happy. For the first time since arriving on Seabreeze Island, Grace allowed herself to consider the impossible possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could stay. Chapter 6. The Conflict. Grace's phone buzzed insistently as she sat at the small desk in her room, putting the finishing touches on a social media post featuring photos from the morning's beach walk. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop. Richard Pinnacle, her boss, was calling for the 4th time that day. She couldn't avoid him any longer. "Grace," Richard's voice was sharp even through the phone's tiny speaker. "I've been trying to reach you for 2 days. What's this about extending your trip? The Sandpiper Resort contract needs to be finalized by tomorrow." Grace took a deep breath, looking out her window toward the harbor, where festival preparations continued in full swing. "Richard, I can explain. I hope you can, because I've got Marcus Whitfield breathing down my neck about this winter gala. You were supposed to scout the venue and get back to me with recommendations." Marcus Whitfield, CEO of Whitfield Industries and Pinnacle Events' most important client. Grace felt a familiar anxiety clench in her chest. "I understand the urgency, but something unexpected came up." "More unexpected than a $2 million contract?" Grace closed her eyes. "I'm working on a story that could be huge for the company. Coastal Living magazine is featuring a destination I discovered, and if we position ourselves as the agency that can deliver authentic, undiscovered venues." It was a stretch, and she knew it. Richard's silence suggested he knew it too. "Grace, I'm going to be direct. You've been with this company for 8 years. You're up for partner consideration at the end of this fiscal year. But if you blow the Whitfield contract because you decided to play travel blogger on some backwater island." The threat hung in the air between them. Grace felt her carefully constructed career crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. "I'll be back tomorrow," she heard herself saying. "I can meet with Whitfield first thing Monday morning." "Good. And Grace, this better be the last time we have this conversation." The line went dead, leaving Grace staring at her phone in the sudden quiet of her room. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the festival preparation: laughter, music, the calls of vendors setting up their booths. Inside, she felt like she was drowning. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Grace, it's Luke. Can I come in?" She opened the door to find Luke holding a mug of coffee and wearing an expression of concern. "Everything okay? You looked upset when you came upstairs." "Work crisis," Grace said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "My boss isn't happy about my extended vacation." Luke stepped into the room, his eyes taking in her laptop, the scattered papers, the obvious signs of stress. How not happy? Grace sank into the window seat, her energy suddenly depleted. Partnership threatening, not happy. "I have to go back tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Luke's voice was carefully neutral, but Grace caught the flash of disappointment in his eyes. "The festival doesn't start until Friday. I know. I'm sorry. I thought I could make this work, but Grace gestured helplessly at her phone. Some things are more important than Christmas festivals, apparently. Luke was quiet for a moment, looking out the window toward the harbor. What's the job opportunity that's so urgent? Grace explained about the Whitfield contract, the winter gala, the partnership consideration. As she spoke, she watched Luke's expression grow more distant, more carefully polite. Sounds like a big opportunity, he said when she finished. It is. It's everything I've been working toward for years. Of course. Luke set down his own coffee mug and moved toward the door. I should let you get back to your planning. Luke, wait. Grace stood up, reaching for his arm. I don't want to leave. This place, the festival, you and Maggie, it's all become more important to me than I expected. Luke's smile was sad but understanding. Grace, you have a life in New York, a career you've built, responsibilities you can't just walk away from. I understand that. Do you? Grace searched his face, looking for some sign that he was as torn about this as she was. Yes, Luke said quietly, because I have responsibilities here too. To Maggie, to the inn, to this community. We both have obligations that matter. What if there was a way to make it work? Long distance, visits when I can manage it. Luke shook his head gently. Grace, you've been here 5 days. This feeling, whatever this is between us, it's not reality. It's vacation magic, holiday atmosphere. Real life is messier, more complicated. His words stung because part of her feared he was right. Was she really ready to upend her entire life for a man she'd known less than a week? For a place she'd discovered by accident? Maybe you're right, she said, hating how small her voice sounded. I care about you, Luke said, and the gentleness in his voice made it worse somehow. More than I expected to care about anyone again. But caring about someone means wanting what's best for them, even if it's not what you want for yourself. After Luke left, Grace sat alone in her room, staring at her laptop screen without seeing it. Through her window, she could see the festival preparations continuing. Volunteers hanging lights, vendors arranging their booths, children helping their parents with last-minute decorations. A knock at her door interrupted her brooding. Grace, Maggie's voice called. Can I come in? Grace opened the door to find the little girl holding a small wrapped package, her expression unusually serious. Dad says you have to go back to New York tomorrow, Maggie said without preamble. Yes, sweetheart, I'm sorry. Work is calling me back. Maggie studied her with those perceptive eyes that were so much like her father's. Are you sad about leaving? Grace knelt down to Maggie's eye level. Very sad. Then why are you going? The simplicity of the question hit Grace like a physical blow. Because I have responsibilities. People counting on me. We're counting on you too, Maggie said, matter-of-factly. The festival committee, and Mrs. Patterson, who's been practicing extra hard on her cookie decorating because she wants to impress the magazine. People, and Mr. O'Brien, who bought new strings of lights for his boat because you said the lighting was important for photos. Grace felt tears prick at her eyes. Maggie, and Dad's counting on you most of all, even though he won't say so because he thinks he's being noble or something. Maggie handed Grace the wrapped package. This is for you. From me and Dad? Grace unwrapped the package with trembling fingers, revealing the sea glass pendant Luke had shown her that morning. Sarah's pendant. We can't give you Mom's actual necklace, Maggie explained seriously. That has to stay in the family. But Dad made you one just like it, with sea glass from our special beach. He worked on it after I went to bed last night. Grace held up the pendant, noting the careful silver work, the way the different pieces of sea glass caught the light. The time and care that had gone into creating it. Maggie, this is too much. Dad says sometimes you have to take a leap of faith, Maggie interrupted. Like when he decided to stop fishing and run the inn. Everyone said he was crazy, but he did it anyway because it felt right in his heart. And what does your heart tell you? Grace asked. Maggie's smile was wise beyond her years. That grown-ups make things too complicated sometimes. If you're happy here, and we're happy with you here, why does anything else matter? After Maggie left, Grace sat holding the pendant, feeling the weight of it in her palm. Through her window, she could see Luke on the front porch, hanging fresh garland around the inn's entrance. His movements were efficient, but lacking the enthusiasm she'd noticed in previous days. Grace pulled out her phone and stared at Richard's contact information. One phone call, and she could be back in her old life by tomorrow evening. Safe, predictable, profitable. But as she watched Luke work, as she thought about Maggie's solo performance she would miss, about the Christmas dolphin she might never see, about the community that had welcomed her so completely, she realized something important. She wasn't afraid of losing her job or her partnership opportunity. She was afraid of losing herself again, of going back to a life where she felt successful but not fulfilled, busy but not purposeful. Grace stood up and walked to her window, pushing it open to let in the salt-tinged air. "Luke!" she called. He looked up, shading his eyes against the afternoon sun. "We need to talk," she said. Luke's expression was carefully guarded as he climbed the stairs to her room. He stood in her doorway, maintaining distance, as if he'd already started the process of letting her go. "I've been thinking about what you said," Grace began. "About responsibilities and real life and vacation magic." Luke nodded, his face expressionless. "And I think you're wrong," Grace continued. "Not about having responsibilities. We both do. But about this being vacation magic. What I feel for you, for Maggie, for this place, it's not some holiday fantasy. It's the most real thing I've felt in years." "Grace, let me finish." Grace took a step closer to him. "I've spent 8 years building a career that looks successful from the outside, but leaves me feeling empty. I make other people's events beautiful, while my own life feels gray and mechanical. I've been so focused on what I thought I was supposed to want that I forgot to ask what I actually wanted." Luke's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "What do you want?" "This," Grace said simply. "You, Maggie, morning coffee with harbor views, community meetings where people care more about doing right than making profit. I want to wake up every day feeling like I'm exactly where I belong." "And your career? The partnership?" Grace thought about the pendant in her hands, about Sarah's belief that the ocean brought people what they needed. "Maybe my career needs to change. Maybe the partnership I really want isn't with a corporate events company." Luke stared at her for a long moment. "What are you saying?" Grace took a deep breath, feeling like she was about to jump off a very high cliff. "I'm saying, what if I stayed? What if we figured out how to make this work, really work, not just as a holiday romance but as a life? Grace, you can't just abandon everything." "I'm not abandoning anything," Grace said firmly. "I'm choosing something. For the first time in my adult life, I'm choosing what makes me happy instead of what makes me successful." Luke's resistance crumbled all at once, and he crossed the room in 2 quick strides, cupping her face in his hands. "Are you sure? Really sure? Because if you do this, if you stay, if I stay," Grace prompted, "if you stay, I'm going to fall completely in love with you. And I don't think I could handle losing someone again." Grace stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, pouring all her certainty and hope into the contact. "Then don't lose me," she whispered against his lips. "Let me stay." When they broke apart, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "What about your boss? Your responsibilities?" Grace picked up her phone with hands that only trembled slightly. "I'm about to find out how good I really am at event planning," she said, "because I'm going to plan the most important presentation of my life." As she dialed Richard's number, Grace looked out at the harbor where the festival preparations continued under the golden afternoon light. Tomorrow, she would either be on her way back to New York with her tail between her legs, or she would be starting an entirely new chapter of her life. Either way, she was finally ready to take the leap. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she opened her laptop and connected to the inn's video conference system. It was 6 a.m. on Christmas Eve morning, and she was about to have the most important business meeting of her life, one that would determine whether she had a future in New York or a future on Seabreeze Island. Luke had quietly brought her coffee and a blueberry muffin, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple before leaving her alone to prepare. Through her window, she could see the final festival preparations taking place in the pre-dawn darkness, strings of lights creating magical pathways along the harbor. At exactly 6:30, Richard Pinnacle's face appeared on her screen, along with Marcus Whitfield himself. Grace's stomach clenched. She hadn't expected the client to be on the call. "Grace," Richard said without preamble, "Marcus has graciously agreed to join us this morning to hear your explanation for this week's delays." "Mr. Whitfield," Grace said, forcing her voice to remain steady, "thank you for taking the time." Marcus Whitfield was exactly what central casting would order for a wealthy CEO. Silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of confident bearing that came from making decisions that affected thousands of people. "Miss Bennett, I understand you've been conducting research for our winter gala from an undisclosed location." Grace took a deep breath. "Actually, Mr. Whitfield, I've been experiencing something that I believe could revolutionize how we approach your event." She clicked to her first slide, the photo compilation from her arrival on Seabreeze Island. "5 days ago, I was rerouted to an undiscovered destination that embodies everything your company claims to value: authentic community, environmental stewardship, and genuine human connection." Richard's expression was skeptical, but Marcus leaned forward with interest. "Instead of the traditional resort venue," Grace continued, "I'd like to propose something unprecedented. What if your winter gala became a weekend destination experience? What if instead of another predictable ballroom event, we created something that reflects Whitfield Industries' commitment to supporting small communities and sustainable tourism?" She clicked to the next slide, showing the festival preparations, the local artisans, the families working together to create something beautiful. Seabreeze Island's Christmas by the Sea Festival represents everything that's missing from corporate events: authenticity, community spirit, and genuine emotional connection. Your guests wouldn't just attend a party, they would be welcomed into a tradition. "Miss Bennett," Richard interrupted, "Mr. Whitfield specifically requested an upscale resort venue." "With respect," Marcus said, holding up a hand, "let her finish." Grace felt a surge of hope and clicked to her detailed proposal. "A weekend retreat format. Your guests stay at carefully selected boutique accommodations throughout the coastal region. Saturday evening, they're ferried to Seabreeze Island for an intimate gala dinner hosted by the local community. Instead of hired entertainment, they experience authentic local traditions: live music from island musicians, locally sourced cuisine prepared by families who've lived here for generations." She clicked again, showing projected costs that made Richard's eyebrows rise. "Financially, it's more cost-effective than a traditional resort event. More importantly, it aligns with your company's recent sustainability initiatives and community investment goals. Your guests leave with genuine experiences instead of forgettable small talk and overpriced catering." "What about logistics?" Marcus asked. "Weather contingencies? Capacity limitations?" Grace had spent the entire night preparing for these questions. Weather becomes part of the experience, rather than a complication. Capacity limitations ensure exclusivity. "We're not trying to accommodate everyone. We're creating something special for your most valued stakeholders." She clicked to her final slide. Testimonials from festival visitors, photos of the inn, statistics about the economic impact such an event could have on the local community. "Mr. Whitfield, your company prides itself on making investments that create lasting, positive impact. This event wouldn't just celebrate your achievements. It would actively support a community while providing your guests with something genuinely memorable." When Grace finished, the silence stretched for several heartbeats. Marcus Whitfield sat back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Miss Bennett," he said finally, "this is either the most innovative event proposal I've ever heard, or you've lost your mind." Grace's heart stopped. "Given my company's recent initiatives around community investment and sustainable business practices," Marcus continued, "I'm inclined to think it's the former." Richard looked like he'd been struck by lightning. "Mr. Whitfield, are you saying—" "I'm saying I want to see this place for myself," Marcus said decisively. "Miss Bennett, can you arrange for me to visit this island before we make a final decision?" Grace felt like she might faint with relief. "Absolutely. The festival runs through tomorrow, Christmas Day. You could see it in action." "Excellent. Richard, clear my calendar for tomorrow. I'm taking a helicopter to North Carolina." Marcus's smile was genuinely interested now. "Miss Bennett, If this proposal works out, it could be the beginning of a very different kind of partnership between our companies. After the call ended, Grace sat in stunned silence for several minutes. She'd done it, not only saved her job but potentially created an opportunity that could benefit both her career and Seabreeze Island. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Grace?" Luke's voice called. "How did it go?" She opened the door to find him waiting in the hallway, his expression anxious but hopeful. Behind him, Maggie peeked around the corner in her pajamas. "Did you get fired?" Maggie asked with characteristic directness. Grace sank to her knees and pulled Maggie into a hug. "No, sweetheart, I didn't get fired." "Does that mean you're staying?" Maggie asked, her voice muffled against Grace's shoulder. Grace looked up at Luke, seeing her own hope reflected in his eyes. "It means I have a chance to make something work. My biggest client wants to visit the island tomorrow, to see if we can host his company's winter gala here." Luke's face lit up with understanding. "Grace, that's incredible. The economic impact alone could help save the festival permanently," Grace finished. "But first, we need to make sure tonight is perfect." "Is everything ready for the boat blessing?" "Almost," Luke said, helping her stand. "The fleet's decorated, the choir's rehearsed, and Eleanor has enough hot chocolate to warm half of North Carolina." "And the Christmas dolphin?" Grace asked, thinking of Maggie's story. Maggie's face grew solemn. "We won't know until tonight. Grandpa Carter always said the dolphin only comes if the Christmas spirit is strong enough." As the day progressed, Grace threw herself into the final festival preparations with the energy of someone who finally understood what she was working toward. She helped arrange vendor booths, directed the positioning of lights for optimal photography, and coordinated with Jessica Wong to ensure the magazine coverage would showcase the island at its best. But more than that, she felt herself becoming part of the community rhythm, sharing tasks without being asked, accepting help without feeling obligated, contributing to something larger than herself. By evening, the harbor was transformed into a wonderland of lights and music. Boats of every size bobbed at their moorings, their masts and rigging outlined in twinkling lights that reflected off the dark water like fallen stars. The community had gathered on the pier, and along the shoreline, families bundled in warm coats and scarves, sharing thermoses of hot drinks and homemade cookies. Grace stood with Luke and Maggie near the end of the pier, watching as Pastor Murphy prepared for the blessing ceremony. The little girl wore her best dress and a wool coat that was slightly too big for her, her hair braided with ribbon that matched the red bows decorating the lighthouse. "Nervous about your solo?" Grace asked gently. Maggie nodded, then looked up at her father. "Dad, will you sing with me, like you and Mom used to do?" Grace saw Luke's throat work as he swallowed hard. "Sweetheart, I don't think—" "Please?" Maggie's eyes were wide and pleading. "Grace is here now, and it feels right. It feels like Mom would want us to." Luke looked at Grace, and she saw the war between grief and hope playing out across his features. "Only if Grace sings too," he said finally. "I'm not really a performer," Grace began. "Neither am I anymore," Luke said softly. "But maybe that's what makes it perfect." When the time came for the children's choir performance, Grace found herself standing between Luke and Maggie on the small platform that had been erected near the lighthouse. The gathered community fell silent as the first notes of Silent Night drifted across the water. Maggie's clear, sweet voice led the way, but when Luke joined in with his rich baritone, something magical happened. Grace felt her own voice blend with theirs, creating a harmony that seemed to encompass not just the three of them, but the entire community gathered around the harbor. As they sang, Grace noticed movement in the water beyond the boats. At first, she thought it might be a trick of the lights or the gentle waves, but as the song continued, she saw it clearly. A dolphin, surfacing and diving in a pattern that looked almost like dancing. Maggie saw it too, her voice never wavering, but her eyes growing wide with wonder. The dolphin seemed to be moving in time with the music, its sleek form cutting through the water with graceful leaps that caught the festival lights. When the song ended, spontaneous applause erupted from the crowd, but all eyes were on the water, where the dolphin continued its dance for several more minutes before disappearing into the darkness beyond the harbor. "The Christmas dolphin," Maggie whispered, her face glowing with joy. It came back. Pastor Murphy stepped forward to perform the traditional blessing of the fleet, his voice carrying across the water as he asked for safe passage for all who sailed from Seabreeze Island's harbor. As he spoke, Grace felt Luke's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that felt like a promise. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse toward the beach for the traditional Christmas Eve bonfire, Grace found herself surrounded by community members expressing their gratitude for her help with the festival. "Never seen so many visitors," Tom O'Brien said with satisfaction. "Every inn and bed and breakfast within 20 miles is booked solid." "The magazine exposure has been incredible," added Beth Murphy. "I've already gotten 3 orders for custom pieces from people who saw Jessica's article." Eleanor Hartwell approached with her characteristic efficiency. "Grace, dear, I understand we might be hosting a very important visitor tomorrow?" "Possibly," Grace said carefully. "Nothing's confirmed yet." "Well, whatever happens, you've already given this community something precious. Hope." Eleanor's smile was warm and genuine. "That's the best Christmas gift we could have asked for." As the evening wound down and the community gathered around the bonfire for carols and stories, Grace found herself thinking about the path that had brought her to this moment. 5 days ago, she'd been a stressed corporate event planner whose biggest concern was impressing a client. Tonight, she was part of a community, part of a family, part of something that mattered in ways that had nothing to do with profit margins or professional advancement. "Penny for your thoughts," Luke said, settling beside her on the driftwood log where she'd been watching the fire dance. "Just thinking about Christmas magic," Grace said, leaning against his shoulder. "About dolphins and second chances and how sometimes the best things happen when you stop planning so carefully." "Speaking of which," Luke said, pulling a small wrapped box from his coat pocket. "Merry Christmas, Grace." Grace opened the box to find a simple silver band set with a piece of sea glass in the same deep blue as the piece Maggie had found on their beach walk. "It's not an engagement ring," Luke said quickly, his cheeks coloring. "Not yet, anyway. But it's a promise that whatever happens tomorrow, whatever you decide about your career or where you want to live, we'll figure it out together." Grace slipped the ring onto her right hand, where it caught the firelight like a captured piece of ocean. "I love it," she said softly, "and I love you." It was the first time either of them had said the words, and they hung in the salt-tinged air between them like a blessing. "I love you too," Luke said, his voice thick with emotion. "Both of you, you and Maggie. You've given us something I didn't think we'd ever have again." "What's that?" Grace asked. "A future that feels like joy, instead of just survival." As midnight approached and Christmas Day officially began, Grace looked around at the faces gathered around the bonfire. Maggie asleep against her father's shoulder, Eleanor organizing the cleanup with military precision, Tom and the other fishermen planning tomorrow's abbreviated celebration before they returned to their boats. These people had welcomed her not as a tourist or a business opportunity, but as family. Tomorrow she would find out if she could build a professional life that honored both her skills and her heart. But tonight, surrounded by love and community under a canopy of stars, she already had everything she needed. The Christmas dolphin had returned to Seabreeze Island, and so had Grace's faith in magic. December 23rd, 1 year later, Grace Bennett Carter stood on the same ferry deck where her adventure had begun, but this time she wasn't alone. Beside her, Marcus Whitfield and his wife Catherine watched the approach to Seabreeze Island with the wonder of first-time visitors, while a small group of Whitfield Industries' top executives and their families crowded the ferry's rail, cameras ready. "I still can't believe you talked me into holding our winter gala on an island with a population of 347 people," Marcus said, but his tone was fond rather than critical. 348, Grace corrected with a smile, unconsciously touching the simple gold band on her left hand. "As of last month." The past year had been a whirlwind of changes, challenges, and unexpected joy. After the success of that first Christmas Eve dolphin sighting and Marcus's subsequent visit, Grace had faced a choice that seemed impossible: return to New York and her corporate life, or stay on Seabreeze Island and build something entirely new. She'd chosen both. Grace Bennett Events, her own company, now specialized in authentic destination experiences for corporate clients who wanted something more meaningful than traditional galas and conferences. Her small team included Jessica Wong, who'd left magazine writing to become Grace's marketing director, and surprisingly, Eleanor Hartwell, whose decades of volunteer event organization had translated beautifully into professional coordination. The company's first major success had been Whitfield Industries' Winter Retreat, which had become an annual tradition. But more importantly, Grace had proven that business success and community investment could go hand in hand. Every event Grace organized included partnerships with local businesses, employment for community members, and a percentage of profits directed toward community development. "Grace," Maggie's voice called from across the ferry deck, and Grace turned to see her stepdaughter. The adoption had been finalized just last month, racing toward them with the boundless energy of a 9-year-old who'd been waiting all day for this moment. "They're here! They're really here!" Maggie announced to Marcus and Catherine, as if their presence had been uncertain until this very moment. "Wait until you see what we've prepared for you." "Maggie Carter." Luke's voice carried a gentle warning as he approached. "Let our guests get settled before you start the tour." Grace's heart still fluttered every time she saw her husband approach, especially when he was wearing the cable-knit sweater she'd given him for their 6-month anniversary. They'd been married in August, a small ceremony on their secret beach, with the entire island community in attendance. Sarah's blessing, given through Maggie's confident assertion that Mom would want Dad to be happy, had made the day perfect. "Actually," Catherine Whitfield said with a warm smile, "I'd love to hear about what you've planned, Maggie. My grandchildren are about your age, and they're coming tomorrow." Maggie beamed and immediately launched into a detailed description of the weekend's activities, from the traditional boat blessing to the new additions Grace had helped develop, a children's workshop where families could create their own sea glass ornaments, guided nature walks led by local historians, and cooking classes featuring traditional island recipes. As the ferry docked at the familiar marina, Grace felt the same sense of homecoming that had surprised her that first morning a year ago. But now the feeling was deeper, rooted in hundreds of mornings spent watching the sunrise from the inn's porch, dozens of community meetings where Dee learned to balance tourism growth with preservation of island character, and countless quiet evenings with Luke and Maggie that had become the foundation of her new life. The harbor was even more beautiful than it had been the previous year. The festival had grown enough to justify a longer celebration period, 10 days instead of 5, and the economic impact had allowed for infrastructure improvements that enhanced rather than overwhelmed the island's natural charm. New walking paths connected the harbor to key points of interest. Historic buildings had been restored with period-appropriate detail, and a small visitor center provided information without intruding on the authentic community atmosphere. "Grace," Marcus said as they walked up the familiar hill toward the inn, "I have to admit, when you first proposed this partnership, I thought you'd lost your mind." "And now?" Grace asked, carrying Maggie's backpack, while the girl raced ahead to announce their arrival. "I'm wondering why more companies aren't doing business this way. Our employee satisfaction scores have never been higher, our community investment initiatives are being studied by Harvard Business School, and frankly, these retreats have become the highlight of my professional year." Luke squeezed Grace's hand. "Not to mention the highlight of our year, too." The Mistletoe Inn had expanded carefully over the past 12 months. The main building remained exactly as it had been, but Luke had added a small cottage behind the main structure that served as Grace's office and could accommodate additional guests during peak periods. More importantly, he'd partnered with other island families to offer authentic homestay experiences, creating income streams throughout the community while maintaining the intimate scale that made Seabreeze Island special. "Dad?" "Grace," Maggie called from the inn's front porch, where she stood with Eleanor Hartwell and Tom O'Brien. "They want to know if Mr. Whitfield is ready for the surprise." Grace and Luke exchanged glances. The surprise had been months in the planning, a collaboration between island artists and Whitfield Industries' design team to create a permanent public art installation that would honor both the island's maritime heritage and the company's commitment to environmental stewardship. "What surprise?" Marcus asked suspiciously. You'll see, Grace said mysteriously. But first, let's get everyone settled. Dinner's at 6, and you'll want to rest before tonight's activities. As their guests were shown to their accommodations throughout the island, some at the inn, others with carefully selected host families, still others at the small boutique hotel that had opened on the island's north shore, Grace found herself with a few precious minutes alone with Luke. They walked hand in hand down to the harbor, where the Christmas tree stood in exactly the same spot as the year before, though it was now accompanied by a small stage for performances and a permanent hot chocolate stand operated by Mrs. Peterson's granddaughter. Hard to believe it's only been a year, Luke said, settling onto their favorite driftwood log. Sometimes it feels like I've been here my whole life, Grace agreed. Other times it feels like I just arrived yesterday. Any regrets? Luke asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Grace considered the question seriously. Her New York apartment had been sold months ago, her corporate wardrobe replaced with practical island clothes. Her daily routine transformed from subway commutes and client lunches to ferry schedules and community meetings. Only one, she said finally. Luke's eyebrows rose with concern. I regret not trusting my instincts sooner. I spent so many years thinking I knew what success looked like that I almost missed what happiness actually felt like. Luke's relief was evident. For a moment there, you had me worried. Never, Grace said firmly, turning to face him fully. This, us, Maggie, the business, this community, it's everything I didn't know I wanted. Speaking of things you didn't know you wanted, Luke said, pulling a small envelope from his coat pocket. I have something for you. Grace opened the envelope to find a single sheet of paper, official letterhead from the Seabreeze Island Town Council. A business license? She asked, confused. Read the business name, Luke prompted. Grace's eyes found the relevant line, and her breath caught. The Sarah Bennett Carter Foundation for Coastal Community Development. I know you've been thinking about expanding the business model, Luke said quietly, about creating a nonprofit arm that could help other small coastal communities develop sustainable tourism. The town council unanimously approved the foundation charter, and Eleanor's agreed to serve as board chair. Grace stared at the document, tears blurring her vision. The foundation was something she dreamed about but hadn't dared to pursue so soon. Creating a model that other communities could adapt, helping preserve authentic coastal culture while providing economic opportunities. Luke, this is incredible. But the name... Sarah would have loved what you're doing here, Luke said simply. She would have loved seeing Maggie so happy, seeing the community thrive, seeing traditions preserved and celebrated. Having her name connected to that work feels right. Grace threw her arms around her husband, holding him close as the ocean breeze carried the sense of pine and possibility around them. Thank you, she whispered against his ear, for believing in me, for loving me, for giving me a family and a purpose I never knew I needed. That evening, as the Whitfield Industries guests joined the island community for the annual Christmas Eve celebration, Grace stood once again on the pier watching the boat blessing ceremony. But this time, she held Maggie's hand on one side and Luke's on the other, surrounded by a community that had become her family and colleagues who had become friends. As Pastor Murphy's voice carried across the water, blessing the fleet for safe passage in the year ahead, Grace caught sight of a familiar movement in the harbor. The Christmas dolphin had returned, its graceful form dancing through the festival lights as if celebrating not just the season, but the joy of second chances and new beginnings. There it is, Maggie exclaimed, pointing toward the water. The Christmas dolphin! It's even more beautiful this year. Grace squeezed her daughter's hand and smiled at her husband, thinking about the journey that had brought them all to this moment. Sometimes the most important destinations were the ones you discovered by accident, and sometimes the greatest gifts came wrapped in unexpected packages, like ferry delays and storms that redirected your path toward exactly where you belonged. As the community joined voices in singing Silent Night under the canopy of stars, Grace closed her eyes and made a silent wish for everyone listening, that they too might find their own Seabreeze Island, their own Christmas magic, their own moment of perfect belonging. The lighthouse beams swept steadily across the harbor, a beacon of hope and homecoming, while the gentle sound of waves against the shore whispered promises of peace and endless possibility. And so our story comes to a gentle close, here on Seabreeze Island, where the Christmas dolphin dances in waters lit by festival lights, where love grows as naturally as seagrass in the dunes, and where every ending is really just a beautiful beginning. As you drift towards sleep tonight, perhaps you'll dream of coastal Christmases and twinkling lights reflected on peaceful waters. Perhaps you'll feel the warmth of community and the joy of finding exactly where you belong. And perhaps you'll remember that sometimes the most magical journeys begin not with careful planning, but with an open heart and the courage to say yes to unexpected adventures. May your dreams be filled with salt air and starlight, with the gentle rhythm of waves against the shore, and with the deep peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you're meant to be. Sleep well, and may tomorrow bring its own sweet magic. This has been Christmas Stories for Sleep. Good night.